that he carved niches into to let light in different ways that refracted and actually affected not only the form of the block, but affected the space around it. And when he had the opportunity, I understand, when he had the opportunity to do this commission, there was talk about how to really bring light into the space in a way that would be constantly transforming in terms of the stained glass windows that he designed, the Stations of the Cross, and he incorporated the light modulator idea into these panels, particularly, so that they have a three-dimensional depth and a dimension to them that kind of refracts and changes with the changing light. There's a beautiful passage actually that's recorded in the book, his book, the book about Jim, Skin of the Years, which I had the privilege of interviewing Jim for, where at the completion of this building, and everything was finally in place, they were awaiting the rising of the sun. And I think it was at a certain point in the day, they wanted to see exactly how the light kind of affected and refracted and kind of diffused through the space. And there's a delightful passage in the book where it just describes the architects and everybody who was involved here being stunned in silence, just sort of by the unexpected way the light worked. So I think that was very due to Jim's influence. Yeah.
There is actually in the Fortuna book on page 40, there is a picture of Fortuna Chapel as John Scott had designed it just before Jim Allen became involved. So it's quite an interesting drawing, because you see Jim actually did come in and really, I think with John Scott working incredibly closely and passionately together, they did deliver the chapel into its final form. But in the drawing, which you can see in the book, there are no patterns on the window to speak of at that point. There were no Stations of the Cross like that, no light modulators. So Jim did bring in some really kind of fresh, radical elements, and they did become part of the architecture. And also, of course, the cross that we mentioned too. Originally with the cross, apparently Jim and John Scott wanted the figure of Christ to be basically nailed onto the wall itself, so the building became sort of implicated in that whole thing. But apparently theologically, or the powers that be in the church said, no, you can't do that, you can't put a man on the wall, he has to be on a cross, so the cross was put in a bit later. Thanks, Phil. Tina, I mean, in terms of New Zealand art history, what do you think about this early, I suppose it is an early phase in Jim Allen's work, still working as a wooden sculptor, but moving towards light and space and more immaterial concerns. What do you sort of respond to here? What do you think is interesting about it?
Well, my immediate thought, sitting here experiencing the performances today, is that this would have been, Jim would have enjoyed this, because the space lends itself to creative activity. And I think as a container, isn't it lovely that people can come together, witness something that is generative and exciting. And I think he would have really, really enjoyed seeing it being used in the way that it is. When I approached Jim Allen as an artist, I was a master's student at the University of Auckland, trying to document what I felt might be a disappearing history of what I called post-object art, which was, and I think you might ask me to define that, but which was the sort of work that didn't necessarily survive its first presentation, whether it was performance or sound or video or whatever. And there was this rich history in Auckland, so much of which Jim had fostered and nurtured. And I was discovering it not in the museums and galleries, but in the libraries, like Elam Library or the Research Library at Auckland Art Gallery on bits of paper and photographs and talking to people. And I wanted to sort of secure this. And I was really fascinated by Jim's work after 1969 through that incredible change that he underwent after he'd been away overseas. And that was the period that I was most interested in. So coming to Fortuna, I'm seeing something before that transition. But when I'm here, and I think about this in relation to some of the public sculptures he's done in other places, I see